Today, we examine President Trump's decision to cancel nearly half of the 162 active grants awarded to fair housing nonprofits nationwide. These grants, typically worth about $425,000 each annually, support organizations that educate communities on their housing rights and legal protections. Nonprofits receiving these critical funds actively investigate discrimination complaints and rigorously test for unlawful practices by landlords across urban and suburban areas. In 2023, approximately 34,000 fair housing complaints were filed, with private nonprofits processing nearly 75% of all cases nationwide. Canceling these grants could force nonprofits to significantly scale back investigations or, in worst cases, completely shut down their essential services. Leaders like Nikitra Bailey of the National Fair Housing Alliance warn that many organizations rely entirely on these critical federal grants. With fewer resources, many victims of housing discrimination may ultimately lose access to proper legal recourse and vital support services. The administration defends the sweeping cuts by emphasizing strict compliance with specific executive orders and policy goals issued by the president. Termination letters state that the cancellations are directed by President Trump and the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE. Critics argue these funding cuts undermine basic civil rights by weakening the enforcement of laws meant to combat housing discrimination. Many advocates warn that without robust federal enforcement, systemic discrimination may go unchecked, leaving vulnerable communities at significantly greater risk of segregation. The funding cuts are part of a broader strategy to reduce federal oversight and reshape policies related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This rollback is seen by some as a fiscal measure and a political signal shifting power from federal agencies to local governments. Local governments, however, may lack the necessary resources and specialized expertise needed to fully address the complex issues of housing discrimination. With housing costs continuously rising and persistent shortages, the multifaceted challenges faced by historically marginalized communities are further compounded today. Political analysts suggest these measures are designed to appeal to key voter bases while reducing the role of federal government oversight. Supporters claim that aggressive deregulation will truly empower local decision-makers to better tailor housing policies to their unique community needs. Opponents strongly argue that these drastic funding cuts are overtly politically motivated and could leave countless Americans without essential housing protections. Experts caution that the sudden rollback of funding may completely reverse progress made in reducing racial and disability-based discrimination in housing. Federal officials insist that grantees must consistently meet stringent compliance measures in order to continue receiving essential support from HUD. These rigorous compliance requirements reflect a broader administrative effort to fundamentally reshape federal housing policies under the current executive agenda. Analysts note that the cuts also serve as a political signal, shifting power away from federal oversight to local government authorities. Local leaders fear that the reduced federal role may leave many regions without the necessary tools to combat housing discrimination. The funding cuts are emblematic of a larger effort to roll back diversity, equity, and inclusion policies across various federal agencies. Critics argue that these drastic actions could have profound long-term consequences for civil rights and severely undermine protections for marginalized groups. Observers stress that robust enforcement of fair housing laws is essential for maintaining equitable and inclusive communities across the nation. This controversial move is part of an overall effort to reduce federal intervention and promote a more decentralized approach to policy implementation. Political pundits suggest that these significant funding cuts are deliberately designed to resonate with key voter demographics in upcoming elections. Supporters claim the measures will ultimately lead to a more efficient allocation of federal resources and reduced bureaucratic red tape. As the debate continues, policymakers and citizens alike remain divided over the future direction of federal housing and civil rights enforcement. Lawmakers continue to debate these measures, reflecting deep divisions over federal authority, civil rights protections, and the future of equitable housing policy in America. Observers highlight that these administrative actions could reshape the nation's social fabric, influencing both economic stability and individual civil liberties. Amid ongoing controversy, the debate over federal funding for fair housing remains a pivotal issue at the intersection of politics, economics, and human rights.